And Jessica and me um, we sign a little card that goes to children that's more geared towards them, but it doesn't have their names on them, and so I don't know quite as often what child has a birthday. And then, but trying to keep up with them. Yeah, thankfully, Brooke and Caroline are both in February. So is my anniversary. So I feel like I got that down. And then Connor's in December, 2 weeks before Christmas. So, that's exactly right. So those are easy, I think. But having to remember everybody else, then I can remember dates fairly well. So, all righty. Good morning. Welcome to everyone. Couple of announcements that are related to St. Paul and some of the larger area. Some of you've asked, y'all might have received an email yesterday that talked about Nikki and their family. If not, you probably witnessed at least the news report where two teenagers were struck by a car on I think it was Steam Mill Road. That they were her children, and one of them was killed in the incident. The other one is still at Children's Hospital in Augusta, and so still having a long road with. The daughter was killed. The son is the one in the hospital. So right now, Nikki and Clint are up in Augusta and sort of coming back and forth as much as they can because they have three other children, I think foster children. But nonetheless, some of you have asked about ways that you would like to maybe help with some of the costs and things of that nature. The best way to do that is for you just to make a check to St. Paul, put altar fund, like the benevolence fund, and just put her name down in the for section. That would be the easiest way. Um, That's correct. Yeah, to help cover some of the expenses. There's going to be a fair amount of medical expenses, I'm sure, and mhm. And there's some funeral expenses as well. So a lot of that is we're trying to either get donated or what have you. But there will be some expense, I'm pretty sure. We don't have plans of yet. We think maybe Saturday afternoon will be the time of service. We'll be here at St. Paul in our sanctuary, but that's not final yet. So, but anyway, I know a number have called the church. So if that's something that you feel led to do, feel free to do so. Ukraine war update. There's going to be an update that goes out in the latest bombing to Ukraine that have targeted cities. Kirker Grove was hit as one of the cities, and it did hit pedestrian areas, parks, and apartment buildings and things like that. Our orphanages are okay, but it did hit the city and non-military or targets. So I know if you've been following the news, you probably saw that. But yeah, it did hit. That was one of the cities that was targeted. Thankfully, everybody's accounted for, physically okay, but obviously the threats of all that and the bombings, emotionally can take their toll.
Does that mean kind of that now that they've started on that city, they gonna stick with it like they
Don't
did?
know. I mean, most people think this is what I saw in the news. So, I mean, someone who's more up to date than I am, that was some level of response to the bombing of the highway, the bridge and the highway. Yeah. So, sort of some level of retaliation. So we don't know if that's a one and done. I mean, who knows with this, uh, but just if you're following the different bombings, and it probably would have recognized the city that's the city for the orphans that we support. Thankfully, a lot of power outages, and will be for a number of probably days and weeks, because some of the power plants were targeted, and water shortages. Back from the support that you gave when the war broke out in February and March, we were able to purchase generators. We were able to purchase large water tanks, and so medical supplies, all those. So for the time being, our orphans will fare better. I mean, that's just compared to others. So thank you for that, but did want to give you an update. St. Paul for All coming up in a couple of Sundays, October 23rd. You'll somewhere on your tables, if it's easier for you to sign up with paper instead of signing up online, if you would just fill that. And that's to take a shift. On that Sunday, what we're asking people to do is and it's I think from like 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. And it's it's real simple, and we can play the video after the break. I'll get Teresa in here to play the video. Basically, you just measure out basic like rice and beans, and it's like an assembly line. And you put it in a bag, and then from there it's sealed. It'll go into a box, and then the company that we're targeting with, called Rise Against Hunger, that we've contracted with, not targeting, they'll then take it and distribute it around the globe. But we would like to fill about 25,000 bags, so we need a lot of people to sign up on that particular Sunday morning. It's all going to be in our youth building, so just kind of FYI there. But if it's easier to sign up with paper, you have a form for that. Last announcement, trunk or treat, or I think it's called Cars, Stars, and Costumes or something like that. That's Wednesday, October the 26th. We still need a few volunteers that'll park their car up. Let me get my bearings. Sorry. I don't know how to cut this thing off where it doesn't make noise. Out this way, up in that upper parking lot. Just people to put their cars in and sort of pass out candy from your trunk. So if you're willing to do that on that Wednesday night, that would be fantastic. If so, just tell Kathy or Jessica on your way out. But I think it's like 26 cars we need, and I think we've got some, but we need a few more. So I think some of y'all did it last year. Hopefully it was fun, and so same type of deal. All right, any announcements or questions around any of that before we jump into the text? All good? All righty. So we are now going to finish up Daniel, the very ends of Daniel chapter 2, and then we'll jump into chapter 3 and hopefully square all that up today. Before we pray, let's go ahead and pray, and then we'll begin. Lord, today we are grateful for this opportunity to share together, to gather in your name. We're mindful of all the events that are in this community, the events around the world, those places that do not, in various forms, represent your kingdom. Then we pray for them, O God, that your kingdom would reign. At the same time, we pray for those that are grieving and hurting. We know just a number of tragedies in our community. Be mindful of them, O God, we pray. And then in our time of study, we want to pay attention to the text for a purpose, that it becomes a means by which we continually change from the inside out. So guide us and direct us, O God, we pray, and we pray this in your name. Amen. All right, so when we last left it, chapter 2. Chapter 2 is the passage where Nebuchadnezzar receives a dream, and he's troubled by it, and he calls all the leaders or the wise men in to interpret the dream. He asks them first to tell the dream and give the interpretation. Nobody can do it. Eventually, it lands on Daniel's desk, and Daniel goes in, and he prays with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and God grants Daniel the dream, at least what it was, and then also the interpretation. And then, of course, Daniel then goes to Nebuchadnezzar and informs him of what God has done. Now, we ended last week with the interpretation, and the first part of the interpretation is fairly easy. That's the kingdoms that are coming from Babylon, and then the next 4 kingdoms after that. The stone in the mountain of the dream refers to Christ's advent, comings. And what we don't know, or at least what's argued in the church or among theologians, is it referring to first advent or first coming, as in incarnation, that the Gospels describe, or is it talking about culmination of God's kingdom in Christ's second coming? And there's just debate either way, but that's about as certain as we can get, just because we just don't have enough information to do anything other than to limit it to one of those two. And depending on, there's some that will lean towards first advent. There are some that will lean towards second advent. And on one level, it doesn't matter, because the thrust of the text is not to describe the when, W-H-E-N, of it, as much as that God will care, and that God's sovereignty is still a part of this, and that all kingdoms sit under God's kingdom. That is the major teaching or the major push from the text. Again, there's just some things when it comes to when certain things are to take place, the Bible just doesn't answer it, and it's not as concerned with it as much as that we are in our day and time. So, but last week we went into that to some level of specifics. If you're interested in that, or if there's something that's unclear, you can always go back and watch last week's lesson. We archive all of those. So, but today what we want to do is we want to pick up on verse 46 of chapter 2, and we'll run it through. If someone would read verses 46 through the end of the chapter, which I think is 49, so just a few verses. This is the aftermath of after Daniel informed Nebuchadnezzar of the dream and the interpretation.
Then King Nebuchadnezzar bowed down to the ground before Daniel and worshipped him, and he commanded his people to offer sacrifices and burn sweet incense before him. The king said to Daniel, "Truly your God is the God of gods, the Lord of kings, a revealer of mysteries, for you have been able to reveal these secrets." Then the king appointed Daniel to a high position and gave him many valuable gifts. He made Daniel ruler over the whole province of Babylon, as well as chief over all his wise men. At Daniel's request, the king appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to be in charge of all the affairs of the province of Babylon, while Daniel remained in the king's court.
All right, thanks. That's all right, no worries. So, yeah, I know it. Well, I'm glad she recognized that. I mean, there's only like about 40 cards over there. So, yeah, good job, Grace. So, all right. So we have the aftermath from dream and then interpretation, and we get some level of acknowledgement from Nebuchadnezzar in relation to Yahweh. This is not conversion. All right. This is not where Nebuchadnezzar is converted. This is just an acknowledgement that amongst all the gods in the Babylonian world, Yahweh is now seen as at least a part of that, but definitely not conversion. We also know that Daniel receives some level of promotion, probably he received some level of funds, maybe income. At the same time, he would have received some level of promotion and job. What we'll discover is that he probably has moved from whatever district that he was in to now being over the district that the capital city was a part of. At least some moving up the ranks of importance, because Daniel will have access to Nebuchadnezzar going forward. And so chapter 1, remember, he's just one clog in the wheel or in the system. And they had a 3-year training period. At the end of the 3 years, they're interviewed. Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they all pass. So they're put into the Babylonian system and some level of the government work. And then little by little, they're climbing the ranks. And in each time, there comes with some level of greater responsibility. Daniel now has received some level of where it's a larger responsibility. And what most people believe is that he was moved to some administrative office in the province of the empire, this one now connected to the capital city. And maybe either chief counsel or some part of maybe a chief council with other wise men to Nebuchadnezzar. And it's not just Daniel. Daniel does not forget his buddies. They all receive some level of promotion, maybe some level of an administrator or administrators in a different province, probably close to Babylon, the capital city. So, but from all of this, we can at least draw some level three conclusions. One is, again, the central theme of God as sovereign over kings and over the affairs of the earth. That is, even though we don't have the when of these things taking place, what we do know for certain is that, according to Daniel 2, is that all of it sits under God's hand. And so when we first started this study, one of the things we talked about, one of the larger themes of the book of Daniel is, and it's almost in every chapter, that whether it's with Daniel and the three, or whether it's with Nebuchadnezzar, or whether it's going to be with Belteshazzar, which is Nebuchadnezzar's son, or whatever it may be, even in these visions at the end of the book of Daniel, all of it is seen as being directed by God. So the sovereignty of God is the main theme, and this is another example of it, that even the affairs of Babylon in some form or fashion sit under God's hand. Now we do have God as being, or Yahweh being seen as omniscient. What Nebuchadnezzar actually said in that little bit is that he is God of gods and Lord of kings and a revealer of mysteries. And so we see now in God's sovereignty, part of the way that is impacted is that this sovereign God is the one that reveals things. And then the last part, or at least the last conclusion we could draw from this chapter, is that empires will arise and fall, but there's something about the kingdom of God that will surely come that's independent of or transcendent of earthly kingdoms. All right, any questions about chapter 2? We all good? Yep. Mm-hmm. Well, you'll see that when we move to chapter 2 or chapter 3, he's not as concerned because he goes through this building project with this big statue. He was concerned before he receives the interpretation. After the interpretation, I don't think he's as concerned, other than the fact that most kings in the ancient world lived in a general anxiety that assassinations could come.
So just Daniel being able to tell him the dream
wouldn't have ended all of his fears. I mean, well, we don't know. I mean, to some degree, we're trying to get into the psyche of Nebuchadnezzar, and we just don't have that information. I would argue that at least from this dream, he's not worried about assassinations, other than the fact that it was, in the king's court, there are people who are always vying for power, and they will. And they link up with different groups throughout periods of times. And so, I think it's always a threat for any ruler in the ancient world that, at the sword, their reign could end. So there's probably a little bit of both, where there is some level of resolve in Nebuchadnezzar, or at least some level of peace in knowing that it's not now. But, tomorrow, I would imagine, or weeks or months, he woke up still with that same fear. I don't know if that answers your question or not, but I mean, we don't know. I mean, we just, because it doesn't talk about him being troubled anymore by the dream, but we do know the threat of assassinations and change in rulers are ever present. I mean, when Nebuchadnezzar dies years down the road, the next two rulers, it's either the next 2 or 3 rulers. Nebuchadnezzar rules for like, what is it, like 43 years? And then all the other kings after Nebuchadnezzar only rule for 23. And of the 3 to 5, I can't remember exactly how many kings there are, 2 of them are assassinated. So, I mean, you know, there would have just been that level of threat at some degree. I mean, I don't know if that helps you or not. I mean,
You just seem to be in such a panic.
oh, it was, yeah.
Tell everybody,
Yeah, oh, yeah.
and then you says, this is what your dream means, but it didn't say, you're not going to be assassinated.
Right.
It didn't say anything except.
Well, Nebuchadnezzar.
After, what does it say? Says, you are the heart of Eldon after you. It doesn't say any time about when, and you didn't
That's right.
think that was.
That's correct. Yeah, so I mean, we don't know how long. Again, that when the time issue is just Daniel doesn't concern himself with the time issue as much as we would want him to, or Shane would want him to. That would make it easier for me. And you know, but there's because the book of Daniel is 70 years of his life. I mean, Daniel never leaves Babylon; he dies in Babylon, and so he's deported as roughly a 13-year-old. Maybe 14 max, and he dies, most people believe, like early to mid 80s. So I mean, the better part of 70 years he's in the Babylonian administration, and he doesn't make it back. Or the Persians, he's there to witness the change from the Babylonians to the Persians, and when I think it's Cyrus allows people to return, Daniel just doesn't go, and we don't know why. I mean, it's not like maybe just felt like didn't want to. I mean, I don't know. I mean, but because it would have been you think about walking, or either like in a some level of a caravan from Babylon to Jerusalem. I mean, it's not like getting on a plane and flying home. I mean, it was uprooting and then going back to a place that you haven't been, and probably you remember as a teenager. But that's really it. And I mean, they would have received word. I mean, we do know that when Nehemiah returns, so Nehemiah is going to also be in the Persian administration, and he gets letters from homeland talking about how bad it is. So it's not like when they return to Jerusalem that all things are hunky-dory. I mean, it's still left in ruins. And even when they return, it's... the few are controlling the many. So, I mean, they're not going back to, you're not going back to your home stadium to play. I mean, you're going back to hometown, but it doesn't look like your hometown at all. But there's always a threat. And so even, I mean, in the Bible, you see this with different rulers. But you can get outside of just the rulers that are mentioned in the scriptures and just look at history and the constant, flux of one ruler to the next and securing the throne, normally through children or marriages. I mean, that happened in the Bible, and it happened, outside of the Bible. I mean, Solomon was, for lack of better words, a master at it. Now, it didn't help him, but I mean, he married a ton, and, his children married off a ton, and all for treaties. So, there was the securing the throne. That was always first and foremost, I would imagine, in many of the kings and queens of history. All right. Any other questions, comments about chapter 2? All good? Maybe. All right, so let's jump into chapter 3. Chapter 3, no dreams, which is good. But now, Pam, what you will see in chapter 3 is Nebuchadnezzar was always, he wasn't the most non-anxious, let me go and think about it, and then I'll come back after a month and give you my renderings. I mean, quick-tempered. I mean, at least what we can, the conclusion that I think many would draw is that, on a whim, he could change his mind fairly quickly, because you'll see it here in chapter 3. It's actually a phrase that's used a couple of times where it talks about fits of rage. And so have to see how it goes. So let's jump into chapter 3. This is the fiery furnace and chapter. So one I think most will be familiar with. And if someone would read verses 1 through 7, this will set the stage for us.
King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold, 90 feet high and 9 feet wide, and set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. He then summoned the satraps, the prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials to come to the dedication of the image he had set up. Was it his image?
Yeah, so what most people believe that what he's creating is something in the dream. And and it's not going to be an image. Most scholars, and I would agree with this, don't believe that this is an image of Nebuchadnezzar. This is probably an image of Marduk, which is the chief god in the Babylonian, because the Babylonian kings one of the things that we know about the Babylonian kings, it wasn't like they are God incarnate. They didn't see themselves as that. So most people, to make a graved image of yourself, that's not something that the kings would have done. It probably was something that looked like, like some level of whatever that Marduk looked like, so.
So the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the provincial officials assembled for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and they stood before it. Then the herald loudly proclaimed, "This is what you are commanded to do, O peoples, nations, and men of every language. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace."
Yeah, so here we go. Now we've got King Nebuchadnezzar. He's making this huge statue, 9 stories high for the most part. And again, because this comes directly after the chapter 2 with the dream, that most people, and he mentions gold. Remember, the head of the dream, the statue in the dream, was made of gold. And that was, the symbol of that was that it was Babylon. And so most people believe that he's either making that statue in some form or fashion, or most likely made a statue that would be something along the lines to the god Marduk, who's the principal god in the Babylonian pantheon of deities. We do have a list. Now, there have been some archaeological digs around this area that has found what many believe would have been the base of this statue in the region of Dura, and which I think is about either 6 or 16 miles. I can't remember exactly how long. I think southwest from where Babylon would have been. That's all I can remember. So I mean, but you can. I'm sure somebody can Google that up. But there's just a huge brick structure that would make sense to be the base of a statue that could at least house or could support a 90-foot statue. We also have listed the different, at least we get some level of administrative structure or breakdown inside the Babylonian government. You got satraps who probably were over large regions, and then then the pecking order follows after from what's next after satraps. Is it governors? Is that? Yeah, you got prefects who probably the large area was probably broken down into smaller districts. Prefects would have had oversight over them, and then governors in smaller areas on down the line to eventually you get the last one. So you get some level of administrative structure of what it looks like in Babylon, down to, I guess, the magistrates would be the local individuals. And they're building this large statue. This would have been outside of the city, most likely that people would have witnessed or seen on their way into the capital city. So maybe the closest thing that we could get at least some acknowledgement of, or has anybody ever been to Egypt? And maybe the pyramids, Sphinx, and all the other statues. Most of the time, those are outside the city. And the idea is you see them on your way in, and it's, so if you're, some of it would be intimidating, all right? So, to be able to witness that. And so that's where most people, again, we don't know for sure. It's a conclusion that we draw that most likely this is outside of the city for a reason, probably on a major trade route or street, that as people, were making their way into the city, they would see this this 90-foot statue and, be impressed. We do know that in some ancient cultures, kings were considered to be divine. It's not the case in the Babylonian Empire. So the odds on it being a statue of Nebuchadnezzar, most believe that's not the case. But they're to worship it. So they didn't worship their own leaders. They would worship. This is another reason why they think the statue probably isn't some personification or whatever you want to call it of a god, because when the music is to be played, they are to worship. And not just that, there's a pretty hefty penalty for disobeying, right? Which is what? Fiery furnace, that's right. So if they had a structure, so let's just say this is the 90-foot structure, arms, and then the way they would do it is on a hillside. Obviously they would just put up mounds of earth eventually to build the structure. They would have a furnace that people would walk up, and there was a hole in the middle, and there was a hole here to make the brick or to make the structure. So, eventually when we get to the rest of the chapter, or we read the end of the chapter, that, they walked up and threw, or they were going to throw Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego down in it. Obviously if it's that hot, you can't just put a wooden ladder. I mean, so it'd be an earthen structure that would go up, and then they would do whatever they needed to do, and then they could get whatever brick or whatever out that way. So, if you ever, again, this is one of those, if you're on Jeopardy, you've got the answer now. So, but it's a hefty penalty for those who don't bow down, and that is they are to be hurled into this blazing furnace. We do know, Jeremiah 29, verse 22, that Nebuchadnezzar did burn other people, Zedekiah being one, and Ahab. So this is not the first run of Nebuchadnezzar to want to use the fiery furnace as a means of some level of capital punishment. But there it is. Horrifying way to die. Most people think that's probably about 1,800 degrees. So pretty cold, and no worries whatsoever. So that's the. So here we go. We're going to jump into it. That's the setting for what's about to happen. Now we know the story, so we know how it ends. So let's keep going. Let's pick it up with verse 8, and then if somebody would read from 8, and let's go to 12. So, verse 8, therefore at that time certain, what do y'all have there? Astrologers, Chaldeans, yeah. So we don't know if it was part of the astrologers, as in that whole pecking order of, or hierarchy of administrators, Well, some believe this might just be nobles, and Babylonian nobles. Babylonians refer to themselves as Chaldeans, so that'll kind of give you some insight there. But a group of people came forward, and then do you have? What do you have for verse? Let me find it. Oh. So the verse 8, therefore at a certain time, either astrologers or Chaldeans came forward, and then what do you have next? Brought charges, denounced. Yeah. Yeah, so does anybody have a paraphrase Bible? So maybe the Message or the New Living Bible. What do you have, Gene?
But some officials went to the king and accused some of the Jews.
Oh, so you have accused. Okay. Yeah, the word there is pretty, the literal word the word is often translated as denounced. It actually literally means ate them to pieces. So maybe I guess closest phrase for us would be chewed them out. That's the phrase, which is interesting to me. It's an idiom, but there's some level of hostility towards the Jews, or at least those three. There would have been others that would have probably been in the system, and so what's clear is that at least from the wording is that they're not acting, just out of the goodness of their heart and their love for Nebuchadnezzar. This is an opportunity, most likely, to maybe there's personal jealousy, because what happened at the end of chapter 2? Who got promoted? Right. And so they've been moved. This is what most people believe. They're moved now to districts close to the king, not out on the fringes. These are people that now are going to be in the center of things. And I would imagine, as human nature is human nature, that for some, this is an opportunity to either for their own advancement or an opportunity to at least get back at those who maybe took their jobs or whatever it may be, all from the last chapter. So there's the plot thickens. It's not just the statue and the music. Now we have people who are not bowing down. We know who they are, and we know that there's some group of folks that was maliciously accused, maybe through jealousy. So now they're now brought before the king, and we'll see what happens in verses 9 through 12. So. And we've just read 8 through 12. Somebody would pick it up in verse 13, and let's go to verse 18. Oh, we didn't read 12?
There are some Jews
Okay.
whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who pay no attention to you, O king. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold you have set up. Furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king. And Nebuchadnezzar said to them, Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold I have set up? Now when you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, the lyre, the harp, the pipes, and all kinds of music, if you are ready to fall in and worship the image I made, very good. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand?
All right. So this is now where it's going to get real. Go ahead. You finished on verse, what is it, 16? 15? Yeah, let's just stay here, and then we'll do 16 and through 18 in just a second, because there's a lot in these verses. One being, verse 12 that from the last time. So you look at how they're positioning themselves. That is the Chaldeans or the astrologers or whomever it might be, and they remind the king of his decree. So these people, they're not paying attention to the king, nor do they worship the king's God. So there's sort of a double accusation being made. And then, of course, when Nebuchadnezzar heard of this, there's that phrase, that first one, in furious rage. Do you have anything other than in furious rage? What do you have? It's actually two words. It's rage and anger are the two words. So it's not just it's more than just the average response. I mean, this is furious. This is shaking almost, that type of anger. And the parties are named. It's Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And the charges are against them as they paid no attention to the king. They don't serve the king's gods, and they refuse to worship the statue. What's interesting here, again, that furious rage, and so you have Nebuchadnezzar now getting ready to move against the three, and he gives them, he gave him another opportunity to worship. I mean, why do you think he did that?
He didn't really want to destroy them.
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's obviously angry, but two reasons why. One, and I don't agree with this. I think this is the minority view. Some believe that maybe he had some level of affection for the three, might have known them in some form or fashion. There's a lot of speculation to how close they were to Nebuchadnezzar. We don't know yet. What I think it was is that there's been a lot of investment in these administrators by now. So they go through, they're deported from whatever country they come from. They're in that education indoctrination period of time for 3 years. They've passed that test. They've been given jobs. They've served those jobs in some form or fashion. They've been promoted, right, at the end of chapter 2. So there's some level of advancement. And, maybe for Nebuchadnezzar, there could be a sense of, if these guys are, if I put them to death, maybe I lose that asset. I think there's some truth to that, not a ton, because Nebuchadnezzar didn't have he's already proven that he'll kill a ton of folks. Without a word. Chapter 1, the guard that's over Daniel when they do the food laws, he's a little worried. Remember the conversation there? It's like, well, if you don't eat from the king's table, the king's going to look to me. And the wording is some anxiety there in the wording. It's like if I don't deliver good students, then I could be in trouble. In chapter 2, when the wise men come and say it's impossible to give you the dream and then the interpretation, he's angry and pretty much is going to wipe all the wise men out. So this you got sort of this tale of two cities going on with Nebuchadnezzar on why he would be gracious here and when he hasn't been gracious in other times. We don't know, so that's the reason why there's a couple of different possibilities for why he. Well, we don't. Daniel's not in this chapter, so we don't know. So we don't know to what level Nebuchadnezzar, what the relationship was with the three, and so Nebuchadnezzar has proven he doesn't have a problem killing people. All right, but there was at the heels of chapter 2. There is some level of, Daniel and the three with Nebuchadnezzar. We don't know if they're, close relationship or if they're just now been promoted to like a regional person. But he does give them an extra chance. And at least to it. And it could be that maybe what he's doing is he could see through the jealousy of the accusers and he's wanting to get the facts. And not to be manipulated or played or whatever it may be at the hands of these other people. All three of those have some level of merit. And so maybe it's a little bit of all. But so that, and so they're the three. They're going to give another opportunity. Now, this is me personally. I think the next three verses are fantastic. And I think they're some of the best verses in all of the Old Testament. And so let's read those. Well, y'all tell me where you're at. We're 15 till. You want to take a break and then come back and pick this up? Or do y'all want to, because I'll need it. Okay, yeah, so let's then read 16, 17, and 18. Somebody read that. All right.
Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to save us from it, and he will rescue us from your hand, O king. But even if he does not, we want you to know, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold that you have set up.
So pretty bold, if you think about it. So again, there's hundreds of administrators at least. They've got the statute, music plays. Nebuchadnezzar, probably on some level of stage, cannot see everybody. There are some that don't see, the three are not bowing down. They're outed, brought out of the group to Nebuchadnezzar. They're now in his company, and Nebuchadnezzar gives them another opportunity to bow down. They will not do it, and it's not. The answer here is just fantastic. There's no need there's no need, and also remember, go back and look at the end of verse 15. Notice how Nebuchadnezzar frames that question. Or at least the comment there. If you do not worship, you shall immediately be cast into the burning fiery furnace. And then what? Yeah, who not only who will save you from what? My hands. That's right. So now Nebuchadnezzar has placed himself in, with the conversation with the three, as if to say, I'm the sovereign one here. And if you don't do what I've said, there's nobody who's going to be able to rescue you from what I will do. And so just think about what's going on. And so their answer is not a plead for mercy. It's what? It doesn't matter. Either way, we're not going to do it. I just think their answer is there's no need to answer you in this matter. It's the resolve. Listen to the resolve of the three. If it be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand. Again, notice his hand, said, O king. But if not, be it known to you. And this is where I think it gets really, really interesting. But even if it doesn't happen, you need to know, king, that we will not serve your gods, nor worship the golden image that you have set up. Which is, just fascinating to me, the resolve that exists in the three. Because you would argue, and I would argue this, they have no clue if whether or not they're going to be saved. It's a statement of faith that said, yeah, God can do this if God wants to. But if it doesn't happen, we're still not going to bow down. It's not like they've read all of chapter 3 and they know how it's going to end. Right? So this is in real time. So, which raises a number of questions for us. What level of resolve do we have when an outcome is uncertain? Because there's this is not wavering in their mind. It's either way we're going to be good, which is different than what I would argue that the way we approach things sometimes, even when it comes to our faith. I was just reflecting on this last night and this morning, the resolve of their heart. Do we serve because that is just the way of life that we have accepted, not for what one receives or gets from the service? Or do we serve just because that's what we're going to do? Or do we do it because we think there's a carrot that's coming? A carrot, a gift, a prize, a reward. Yeah, absolutely. And so what I think sometimes what we want as Christians is we want to be spared the journey. All right, so when we read the prophets, and Isaiah is probably really good at this, the promises that show up in particularly in Isaiah is not that you're spared the fire, the flood, the water or the flames. It's just that when you walk through those, you walk with God. Now that's different. It's important, but it's different than the idea that, well, because I'm a follower of God, then somehow the outcome is going to be what I want it to be when I want it to be it. And that's not a promise, I think, that is given. There's an interesting book that I don't know I know we read this years ago. I don't think we read it here. But Henry Nouwen, who's a Catholic priest, he died, I think, in the 90s. Great. I mean, he's a prolific writer. I mean, he's up there in my book with someone like a C.S. Lewis, but he doesn't write on the same. Henry Nouwen was brilliant. He just doesn't write from the 1950s. He didn't live in, he wasn't a part of that. Nouwen, I think it's Nouwen. Henri, instead of Henry, Henri. But he wrote a number of books. They're not very detailed. Long. But I think they're fantastic. One of them is called, and he wrote it. It's a Lenten sort of devotion, or at least in its scope, called "Can You Drink the Cup?" And he goes back and forth with the cup of Christ, and so so it's tied to communion, and the way the book is the way growing up, his dad, his family used to love to eat. I think they're Belgian, roughly, and said his dad would have these big dinners and with lots of food and lots of wine, and he said at some point in the dinner, my dad would always give a toast, and he would talk about the cup, and that was so important for him. So he draws upon that image, and then he also draws upon the communion image from the New Testament, and what the cup actually meant. So if you've ever been to like a Pentecost meal, a Passover meal, there are different cups that you would drink, and you drink them at different times. First cup, second cup, third cup. Well, I think like 6, So you get good and snockered by the time you get through the end of the dinner. But the second cup is the cup of suffering. And that's when Christ in the upper room talked about the cup. So the image is, from communion, at least from Christ's perspective, is this whole idea around suffering. And yet for us, we have an aversion to that. And now for good reasons. I don't think we want to suffer, but I think if we're not careful, we can come with an expectation that says, God, because I belong to you, I should not suffer. Almost like you owe me. Come and do what you're supposed to do. Take the possibility of the road or the journey, either from me or replace it with a different road. Maybe one that has more ease. And so we've lost, and I'm somewhat in this camp. Maybe I've got 3 toes in it, not all 10, but half a foot. One of the things that we've lost in modern day Christianity is a theology of suffering that is formed in discipline. And I'm not saying we should go and run to it, okay? I'm not, but it has so much to do with expectation. And that, but what's clear in the both old, and this is where I think the prosperity gospel totally misses it. Prosperity gospel is, if you hang out with Jesus, you're going to be fat and happy. That's what prosperity gospel is. And God, God's the meal ticket, God's the lottery ticket for you, and that's, just you got to either, just going to do it. And I just think that's a half truth. And I these three verses, I think, give a balanced argument to when it comes to faith. Yeah, there are going to be times where God does move. And thanks be whenever that happens. But even if he doesn't, it doesn't change our resolve, because we're not going to bow down. That's just a different, and it's a hard pill to swallow. I'll be the first to admit, because I don't want. I like ease. What's the Eagles song? Peaceful, easy feeling, right? Yeah. But they're not spared. And what we'll discover in chapter 7 is Daniel's even not spared. But neither Daniel nor the three are going to back down. And the reason why is because it has everything to do with their faith. It is not open for debate for them. Good, bad, or indifferent. Our anchor has already been cast over here, and we're not going to change. Again, so just it's not an easy thing to hold. But it's interesting here that that's their answer. O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If this be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. That's incredible to me.
I don't see Daniel mentioned anywhere.
He's not in this chapter.
Where was he when all this was going on, I wonder?
Probably.
Been looking at these guys.
Well, good question. What most people believe. So this is the capital city. Daniel's in the capital city. There are these providences that exist outside. This is outside the city where you have the image, and so this area of folk would be at this celebration. That we don't know if it's all of everybody, but there are just some. It could be the fact that Daniel's not mentioned would at least draw some conclusion that it's not every administrator or leader or whatever it may be, but it's from some level of different providences or whatever. Yeah, don't know. Again, so this is one of those things that we just don't have answers to. And obviously we do know that Daniel does know the three. Up until now, Daniel is, in some level of cahoots with, because when Daniel has an opportunity to receive something, he includes the other three as part of that. He was also part of the deal with the food, the food from chapter 1. But he's not here at this event. Yeah, that's exactly right. So this remember again, this is not Hebrew. Part of chapter 2 through a handful of chapters is in Aramaic, which is the written language, the official language of, even though they spoke a dialect that would be Chaldean. But they wrote in Aramaic as official documents. This is in Aramaic. So this what most scholars believe, and I would agree with this, this is part of official record of Babylonian book. So, but Daniel's not mentioned. That's right. Yeah. So Babylon had a great library. It's one of the things they were known for, and they kept meticulous records. And the fact that this is not in Hebrew would be that this at least came from their library.
So he wasn't requiring everybody under him, all people to do this.
All people that were present at this thing. Yeah. And we don't know if this was, if you got everybody out of their jobs, maybe this is a weekly, these providence, I'm guessing, okay? These providence come on Monday. These providence come on Tuesday. These providence come on Wednesday. But whatever the one that the three were in, this is what happened. Well, we don't know. I mean, we just don't know. Again, that's one of those questions where we would say, is this all of the satraps, governors, administrators, is this just some? If it's just one of those things that we would want greater information. It just doesn't give us.
It doesn't give information that once they were saved, they said, let's forget about this plan.
No, I mean the statue's still there. Now at the end, what we do is that Nebuchadnezzar makes a decree, but let's save that for after the break, or it might even be next week, I think. But they do, he does acknowledge at the end of the chapter. There's something about where I think it talks about being delivered out of his hand, and so what you'll see is that up until now, Yahweh, and I'll tip my hand a little bit, Yahweh is seen as a giver of wisdom. At the end of this chapter, he's also going to be seen as a giver of power. And you've got this interplay between my hand from Nebuchadnezzar and Yahweh is able to deliver even out of the king's hand. So you have wisdom, chapter 2, power, chapter 3. All right, so let's take a break for about 10 minutes and we'll come back. All right, let's go ahead and come back. Because hopefully I want to try to get through the chapter if I can, but might not be able to. And Teresa might come in here at some point. I've asked her to show the video. It's like a 2 hour 40 second, 2 minute 40 second. Yeah, y'all packed a lunch, right? Not even 3 minutes, but it's a video about the packing of the food bags, and it just kind of gives you an idea of what it would look like. And because it's really not that difficult. We just need hands more than anything else. So if she comes in, we'll stop. I'm throwing her a curveball this morning. And she always sends me either a text message or an email that says, "Hey, just want to go over Tuesday. Do you need anything out of the ordinary?" And a lot of times, like, "Nah, I'm just going to use the board. No big deal." Sometimes I'll send her. This is for people that are at home, so that in the lower thirds, they, it sort of looks better than me just writing on the board. And so again, this morning it's like, "Yeah, we're all good." And then all of a sudden, I changed my mind. So. All right, well, let's come on back and just reiterate some stuff, just to sort of kind of see where see the magnitude of their response. No apology was given on behalf of the three, but it wasn't they weren't haughty. It's not a proud reply. It's just a firm. It's just resolve. And, they humbly accepted the fact that God does not always choose to intervene in circumstances. Sometimes he does, sometimes he does not. But either way, they were fully committed to not bowing, fully committed to being faithful, regardless of how the end turned out, which is just it's just a different level of resolve. I think you could make the case that they didn't want to, be thrown into the fiery furnace, but even in the face of that, they were not going to change their mind or change their stance. So then we're going to pick it back up in verse 19, because this will tell us how Nebuchadnezzar responded to their response. So then Nebuchadnezzar was filled with fury. That's that same phrase again, fury and anger. But now we have an additional one, and the expression of his face was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times more than it was usually heated, and he ordered some of the mighty men of his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and to cast them into the burning fiery furnace. Then these men were bound in their cloaks, their tunics, their hats, and other garments, and they were thrown into the burning fiery furnace. Because the king's order was so urgent and the furnace overheated, the flame of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell bound into the fiery furnace. So now we get a little bit of description about Nebuchadnezzar. Again, you had that phrase, he was filled with rage and with anger. But the additional of expression of his face change, his attitude changed towards the 3. The literal translation of the expression of his face was, nose is inflamed, just full anger, full rage. His attitude changed towards the 2. His countenance now became harsh. And then ordered the furnace 7 times hotter. Now, whether or not it was actually 7 times hotter, who knows? It was just hot. It was hotter than normal, or as hot as possible. It is probably the best translation. 7 times, that's one of those where 7 means a complete time, or a completeness. It was completely hot. That's probably the best way to interpret actually how hot the furnace was. They're bound completely. So the text goes to great length to show that they really are at the king's mercy now. They're bound in all their clothing, and they're dumped into the fiery furnace. Most likely the guards walked them up, and when they opened up this lid, the flames came out, probably, not probably, but it burned the guards. And in the process of that, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they're into the fiery furnace they go. So all is lost, right?
It's like a little movie.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, absolutely. So I don't know if there's been a movie about this. Did y'all ever? I mean, I didn't watch all of those episodes where I think it was on one of those channels where they were like going through the Bible, not everything, but different. I think it was called The Bible, right? I mean, the guy that came up with Survivor, he was the producer. What was his name? Or what is his name? Anyway, I don't know. But I don't know if they did this one. Yeah, I mean, so, well, I didn't watch it, so I mean, it's not like I was up to speed on it either, and so, but nonetheless, all right, so don't answer that question on Jeopardy, so we don't know who that is. So let's keep going. So we now we have again, the plot thickens. They fell into the fiery furnace. Now let's read 24. Somebody read 24 and 25. Yeah, so interesting here. So the three went in. You would have, what everybody assumed immediately they would have been burned up, and but they are not. So again, you have the image of they were bound, can't move, in the fire, can move, and instead of three, now you have a fourth. And does anybody have anything other than the son of the gods or a son of God? The divine being is actually the literal, right? And what most people believe, most Jewish scholars would say an angel, and the Talmud, which is sort of some commentary on the Old Testament, says that it's the archangel Gabriel. We don't know, right? But evidently there's four instead of three. But for a pagan king, so again, think about who makes the acknowledgement. For a pagan king, there is this acknowledgement of the fourth figure as being divine, not like the three. And so they're not hurt, and there's a fourth one in the midst of the three. And then verse 26, then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the door of the burning fiery furnace, and he declared, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out and come here. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire, and the satraps, the prefects, the governors, and the king's counselors gathered together and saw that the fire had not had any power over the bodies of those men. Again, think about the image of nobody can rescue you from my hand. So Nebuchadnezzar is positioned himself as being the powerful one. And yet what you have is somebody having more power than him. The fire had not had any power over the bodies of those men. The hair of their heads was not singed. Their cloaks were not harmed. And no smell of fire had come on them. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him and set aside the king's command and yielded up their bodies rather than serve and worship any god except their own God. Therefore, I make a decree. Any people, nation, or language that speaks against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb, and their houses laid to ruins, for there is no other God who is able to rescue in this way. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. So what's, again, interesting here is that Yahweh is seen not only now from chapter 2 as a giver of wisdom, a revealer of dreams, now he's also seen as one of power. And just as Nebuchadnezzar in chapter 2 could not interpret the dream, and yet Daniel, acting under God's direction, could. So you have God, Yahweh, being seen over even Nebuchadnezzar and all the others. Now God is seen as more powerful than even the hand of the king. So when you see both of these, chapter 2 and chapter 3, again, are examples of God's sovereignty, which is the major theme of the book of Daniel. So this is a great chapter. Again, this is not conversion of Nebuchadnezzar. This is just Nebuchadnezzar in full respect of the three and of the God who is now able to rescue even the three out of the hand of the king. And the king promoted them. Literally means that he caused them to prosper, material rewards, respect among the other leaders as well, a job promotion. Now, keep in mind, Babylon had defeated Judah in battle, right? Because that led to the deportation of Daniel and the three and the other best and brightest of those teenage boys, Jewish boys at that time. So in Babylon, the thought was the Babylonian gods are more powerful than Judah's God. I mean, that's just natural in the ancient world. So here you have the reversal of that. And so this chapter is all about power. Who has the most power? And so Yahweh has made it clear to Nebuchadnezzar that, again, all the world, that even in Judah, that is the kingdom of Judah, defeat did not mean that their God didn't exist or was anemic. All right, any comments, questions? Yep.
So why do you only ask the 3 to come out, not the 4?
Good question. Don't have the answer. So, I mean, we don't know. Again, this is one of those that would be a great question to ask. We just don't get the answer. And it's not to try to not answer it. I don't know. Maybe he disappeared. I don't know. I mean, again, that's one of those that it's not concerned with that answer. So we can speculate at best.
In 25 it says, the fourth looks like the son of the gods.
Yeah, it's plural.
Possibly be Jesus.
That's always what some people would draw that conclusion. Jesus, an angel. I mean, I think that's where people want to read back into the Old Testament and find an angel and say that's Jesus. We don't know. Whomever the person was, what we do know that they are not like the three. And according to Nebuchadnezzar, it looks divine. But whether or not it's Gabriel, as the Talmud would suggest, an angel, Jesus, we don't know. And I'm not trying to be. We have no idea. So, what we do know is just that it's different than the three, and the divine one is seen as the reason for the three not being injured or harmed. So again, it's about power, and Nebuchadnezzar is positioned in the beginning of chapter 3 as the one who has power over another person's life, just not those three. But I think the answer to them, and to me, the real standout of the verse is not of the chapter, it's not how it ends. It's verses 16, 17, and 18. Because that gives you some insight into their character, their resolve, their disposition of their heart. And I think that's something for us to really reflect on and pay attention to.
And I think it's the lesson that Daniel wanted to teach to future generations.
That's right. Yep. So good. That's a good comment.
Down to
Yeah. So when we take out, we want to read and make application to our life, and so we have to say, okay, what is the purpose of chapter 3? Well, obviously it talks about power, but you cannot dismiss the three's response. And so, and this book again is written at a time when they are a minority in a foreign culture. And so some of this is apocalyptic, which always has as its genre to be encouraging to current and future generations that if you find yourself in that type of situation, don't give in.
Do you remember some time ago, and I think it was Stephanie, Ron Hudson's daughter, Stephanie.
Caldwell. Mm-hmm.
Stephanie Caldwell, right. And she preached a sermon here, and what I'm hooking to is something maybe that Winston Churchill said or something, but it was this same thought, but even if.
Right.
Do you remember that?
The last time she spoke here was Veterans Day, somewhere close to Veterans Day, probably 3 years ago, maybe. I think it was pre-COVID. Yeah, because we had lunch afterwards. When we had veterans, so it would have been the closest Sunday to Veterans Day, probably 3 or 4 years ago. I don't remember the sermon. I can't even remember what I preach on Sunday, to be honest with you. I mean, literally, when I leave, it's downloaded, and I'm thinking about the next week. And so,
This kind of thing happened any other place in the Bible that you're thinking of that they said?
either way, we're not.
It seems so familiar to me.
Yeah. So, I mean, you get the same thing like with Joseph and Potiphar and Potiphar's wife. There are some other times. I have to go back and find them specifically. So the comment or the question is, are there other times in the Bible where it's something like this? And you do have levels of resolve like that. And of course now, keep in mind that we read any time in the Bible with the expectation of what the ending is going to be. But for those that were there, it's real time. That's right. Yeah. So we're about to move into Advent, so we pick up all the Advent passages from the Gospel. Those had uncertain outcomes. So Mary's response in Luke is fantastic. The Magnificat. Her praise. Because 11, 12, 13 years old. Uncertain outcome with Joseph, uncertain outcome with others, and yet, so her level of resolve is fantastic. So I mean, but we read Advent with the expectation, she's going to give birth to Jesus. Jesus is going to grow up. He's going to be a man. He's going, eventually going to die on the cross. He's going to be resurrected. And we're going to read Ephesians, and now he's up on the throne. I mean, so we just kind of pick it up with this is just one of how we've seen the story, right? So. Part of what we want to do is stop and just take the text for what it is. And so when we read these passages, when they're happening in real time, it's uncertain outcomes. Which, so you think about Abraham. So he gets a word from God that says, all right, you need to leave everything that's comfortable and travel into a place I don't even know where you're going to end. Just trust me on this. So we think, okay, Abraham, we know eventually they're going to struggle with infertility. Eventually they're going to have a son, and on down the line. I mean, but all that stuff was uncertain. So 2 or 3 different times in the book of Genesis where God has to renew Abraham because he's kind of struggling. Paraphrase. If Shane was going to write a paraphrase Bible, it would be, man, I've been following you for years now. There's nothing here. What about all this stuff you promised to me? And so there are 3 or 4 different times that, in experiential ways, Abraham is renewed. And, but it all comes with I'm holding this stuff loosely, but it's just not, but for years, decades, it's uncertain. So, I mean, it's just, and I do it. I mean, I read the passages. I know how it's going to end, If I want to get to the end, they're all going to be saved. It's all good. Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, it's like a Disney flick, So, I mean, it always has a happy ending. And, but in real time, we don't know. All right. Go in peace. May the Lord be with you. That's why I don't like